How's it going, you guys? It's Marshall here, and for today's video, let's have some garage talk. So a fun topic I like to discuss is what are some of the coolest cars you can now purchase on a bargain budget. So oftentimes in this discussion, the cars I would normally talk about or you would normally hear about is cars like the Honda S2K, the E46 M3, or the E55 AMG, and even things like the C5 Z06 and C6 Vet. Reason being is that all of these cars are incredibly fun and can be had for about 20 grand with rather manageable maintenance costs, suited for someone with a $20,000 car budget. However, in today's video, that's not exactly what we're going to be talking about. Sure, those are some of your best bang for your buck cars that you should actually buy, but what if reliability and maintenance no longer existed? What are some of just the coolest cars, period? Cars that used to cost over six figures but can now be had for pennies on the dollar. What if maintenance was an issue you no longer had to worry about and all used cars came with like a free 10-year warranty? The only thing you had to pay for was regular maintenance like oil changes, tires, and gas. What then are some of the coolest, most baller cars you can buy for cheap in a segment of cars I like to refer to as ballin' on a budget? These are cars that when you pull up beside the average person would assume you're some hotshot entrepreneur, but in reality you can only afford a brand new Civic. It's used sports cars and luxury cars that cost well over $100,000 when new. So the first car we're going to be talking about today is the Maserati Quattroporte. This is a car that when new had a base MSRP of 120 grand and can now be had all day for just $10,000 to $15,000. That's just $15K for an Italian Pininfarina designed Maserati with a Ferrari derived V8 engine. You see, the Quattroporte is just one of those cars that I've personally always had a soft spot for. I remember when it first came out as a kid, it was one of my favorite cars on the market. Of course, this car isn't all that particularly good, but you don't buy an Italian car for it to make sense. You buy it because it has a Pininfarina styled body and an intoxicating Ferrari V8 exhaust note. Now the styling, I can see having differing opinions. I remember vividly Clarkson's review of this car in Top Gear and him going off on how ugly the front end was. I admit it does sort of look like a big fish grill, and that's what I thought at first, but after a few months of it being out, the design quickly grew on me, and I've been a big fan ever since. But for that V8 engine and the exhaust note that it makes, there's no arguing how good that thing sounds. However, for this car, you're going to want to skip the first gen models and look at the facelift models from 08 to 2012. The slight facelift changes are nice, but really you want to buy the facelift models because they now have a ZF gearbox replacing that F1 flappy paddle transmission. The gearbox that came in there, it basically broke every 10,000 miles and it cost thousands and thousands to repair every time. However, for these circumstances, we don't even care about that, but still that F1 gearbox was just terrible and super clunky. The car came in three specs, a base model, S, and a GTS model, with the S and GTS coming with a bigger 4.7 liter V8 engine over the standard 4.2. Because the cars are so cheap now and we don't have any maintenance costs, you might as well just skip the base altogether and opt for an S or GTS model. So then why don't I buy one of these cars right now for just 10 grand? Well, normally a Quattroporte is one of the most unreliable cars you can buy, period. It's over 10 years old and Italian made. They have common issues with the earlier gearbox and problems with the engine with the cam actuators, a very common Ferrari V8 engine problem. But this also costs thousands and thousands of dollars to replace, just like the F1 gearbox. And that's just the main known issues. You can't forget about all those little electrical problems you're bound to have and all those failing little motors that are about to break. And this is also a 12-year-old Italian car that needs to be serviced at a specialized Maserati mechanic or specialty shop. So mind you, it's going to have a little bit higher labor prices as well. And now the next car I want to talk about is the Alpina B7. Now this is a car that I just think is straight badass and would be such a cool car to daily or to go to work or go out to dinner in. It's just a great car for taking around town. It's a highway cruiser and the interior still features most modern amenities and it's just overall pretty nice inside. It's very estate-like. It's BMW's flagship German sled. I mean, this car just makes you look like a straight boss. Surely no one would think you got this car for the price of a new Civic, and I particularly like the body style on the 5th Gen 7 series, with the B7 made from 2011 to 2015, and even more specifically, I love the B7 and this really cool Alpina blue paint job. I think it just suits the car very well, and especially with the added lip kit and those super sleek Alpina wheels. This is a really nice looking car, and when this car was brand new, this car started at 127 grand, and it can now be had for under 15 to 20 grand. The car features a twin turbo V8 pushing 500 horsepower and a 0 to 60 time of just 4.5 seconds. That's incredibly fast for such a big and long vehicle. Not bad for the price of a used Camry, although it doesn't share the same reliability as a Toyota. Being a pretty modern BMW flagship car, there's a lot to be concerned about as these cars reach double digit in age. And being BMW's flagship car, I'm sure those repairs won't be cheap either. Even when new, the F01 experienced lots of common computer issue faults, blurry front and rear cameras. The N63 engine in these cars is also BMW's first ever attempt at turbocharging a V8 production car. And it features a pretty complicated hot V design with the twin turbo sitting right on top of the engine. From factory, there were issues with oil consumption, timing system failure, and even issues with fuel injectors getting dirty, and that's just to name a few problems. And honestly, personally, I'm a bit wary of all these new turbo cars in production and don't really see many of them making it much further than 100,000 miles. They're all designed basically to optimize horsepower and fuel efficiency and have really good emissions. And that makes for just these overcomplicated designs that are kind of ticking time bombs in my opinion. However, we'll see in 10 years what happens to all of these modern turbo cars. So this car is similar to the Quattroporte, being that it's also a flagship luxury estate car. And that's just because the nature of this segment for ballin' on a budget cars is going to mostly focus on flagship vehicles. And that's because the nature of these cars is that they always have extremely high starting prices and high depreciation, and that's mixed with uncertain reliability due to flagship models also always having a higher displacement engine, usually with a big V8, V10, or V12. They're also typically outfitted with the latest technology options that can be offered, aka more things to break in the future. Similarly, other notable cars in this category include the Bentley Arnage, an older Bentley that features all the handcrafted luxury of a flagship 200k plus car when new for just 25 grand. I don't know, I just kind of like the funky looks of this car and the premium quality materials used on these earlier Bentleys, but I'm sure it'd be a handful for the mechanic. Or how about a bi-turbo V12 AMG big body Benz? Try the as new 195 grand S65 AMG for under 25k. But good luck trying to keep that thing running if you only have a 25k car budget. Now moving on from high performance flagship luxury cars, how about an exotic supercar with the V12 for under 35 grand? To me, this is one of the best looking cars to ever be made. It's the Aston Martin DB9. I mean, just look at this car. It just looks like whoever's driving this is wearing a suit and smoking a cigar on his way to some fully comped penthouse suite in Vegas. This car just screams 007. It may not be the DBS James Bond drove in the movies, but it pretty much looks the same, and it's the price of a slightly used 3 Series, so what more could you ask for? The DB9 new held an MSRP of $187,000 and can now be found for about 30 to 40 grand. It features a hand-built 6-liter V12 engine producing 460 horsepower. It's not the fastest car or the best handling or driving car, but it's not supposed to be. This is the essence of luxury grand touring cars. This car has too much class to be setting fastest lap times, and the body lines say it all. Couple that with a naturally aspirated V12, and there's not much else that needs to be said about why this car is worth the 30 grand. As for the reliability of this car, if you're even asking if the 35 grand hand-built British V12 sports car is reliable, then you're also probably wondering why every car on this list hasn't been a Mustang 5.0 GT. So those were some of my favorite cars for the most baller cars you can buy on a budget. Granted, if maintenance wasn't an issue. But now I like to play a fun little game I often play with my car friends, and that's build your perfect 3-car garage. The way it works is we set out some sort of budget, and then you use that to pick out your perfect dream car garage. We often cap this at 3 cars, being that 3 is sort of the perfect garage to cover all of your essentials. You can also do whatever, but buy 3 track cars if you want. But we like to keep it realistic here and pretend we might actually own this setup one day. So typically it ends up sort of like this. You pick 1 daily, 1 weekend or track car, and then 1 family car for the wife or to tow around the track car. However, if you want to try and squeeze 4 cars into the budget, you can also do that. So for today, we're going to try and build the best ballin' on a budget 3-car garage with a 60 grand budget. So here we go. Here's my 3-car garage, zero maintenance edition. The first car I picked out was my daily, and this was the easiest and a no-brainer for me at all. It's a car I've actually been highly considering buying in real life, and that's the E60 M5. This is a car that's drastically depreciated in the last year or two, and I think car YouTubers actually had a big influence on these things tanking in price.
This is a car that you never, ever want to own yourself.
Cars that were going for 20K just a year ago are now worth maybe 10 grand in today's market. You can take your pick on spec, etc. for just 10 grand and can find pretty low mile examples with rod bearings done for under 15 grand. Of course, the manual is worth a bit more, but for 10 grand I'll take an SMG, especially if in this hypothetical, it always works and I don't have to pay for that large repair bill. I think the car looks pretty good, and I like the subtle hints like the quad tailpipes that hint at how much of a beast this thing is. And that's because this car has basically an F1 V10 ITB engine in it. It's NA and makes just about 500 horsepower and forces you to rev it out and stretch out the gears as much as possible because it doesn't have much low-end torque. If you know anything about cars, then you probably know that a high-revving NA engine is the winning recipe for fun. And on top of that, this thing sounds insane. This is easily one of the best sounding cars ever made, and I didn't say best sounding 4-door cars, I mean best sounding cars, period. That includes sports cars, supercars, and even hypercars. Now that you guys understand how insane it is that a family car can have a factory V10 for some reason, then you should understand why I would buy this car in a heartbeat if maintenance wasn't an issue. Even with all the reliability problems that this car has, and all the expensive sensors and computers in the car, I'm still actually considering buying this car in real life. So there it is, that's my daily, the E60 M5. Super cheap with one of the coolest sounding engines ever put into a production vehicle. So the next car I decided to pick out was gonna be my family car, which is typically an SUV or truck, and for my pick, I decided to go with a Porsche Cayenne Turbo. I just think it would be kind of funny and kind of cool at the same time to own an old first-gen Cayenne, and especially the Turbo model. These things were all well over 100K when new and are kind of ridiculously cheap to buy now. You can find these all day for 10 grand in rather good condition and running order, but I can only presume they've plummeted so much in price because no one really wants to upkeep such a cheap old Porsche SUV. But for 10 grand, I think this thing would be kind of fun to drive around town and would probably fare well at towing with its V8 turbo engine making 500 horsepower and 516 pound-feet of torque. Also, it's a Porsche, so the build quality is going to be rather nice, meaning, it's not falling apart inside and it still has rather nice materials for an older SUV and would make a pretty neat little family vehicle. But that's, if it stays working and all. I could have also opted for a cheaper Cayenne S model for even less at like 7 to 8 grand, which would accomplish the exact same thing, but what's the fun of that, especially if I don't have to pay for the maintenance? Why would I not buy the turbo model? So that's going to be my daily and family car down at just 10 grand a piece, the E60 M5 and the Porsche Cayenne Turbo. And I purposely tried to keep these as low as possible so that I could kind of splurge on my weekend car. And now for my weekend car, I actually had to put a bit of thought into this one, as I really wanted to stay within the ballin' on a budget theme, so I couldn't pick most of the usual suspects that I would normally pick for my weekend car. So with $30K, my weekend car would be the 996 Carrera 4S. This is a car that, like the E60, I've actually been highly considering buying in real life. And although it's not necessarily an unreliable car, it is a 911, so it comes with Porsche 911 maintenance cost. It does have one issue with the IMS bearing, but it's not too hard to find these with that already sorted out. Now, the 996 generation of 911s has always basically been Porsche's bastard child ever since it debuted, and that's all thanks to those ugly egg-shaped headlights. Now, this is something I've always thought looked terrible and never thought I would want to own one until about a year ago, when for some reason, the car as a package started to grow on me to the point where now I don't really think the headlights look too bad, and especially on the C4S model in particular. With its wide rear arches and that 993 style rear taillight, I really like the look of the 996 C4S, headlights included. And how can you argue with the C4S at just 30 grand? And that's not even trying to find a deal. I've seen these things sell at 25K all the time. And in keeping with the balling on a budget theme, you pull up to a light in your 25 grand C4S, and to the average person, you might as well be pulling up in the brand new 992 model. So there it is, you guys. That's my ultimate 3-car garage, no maintenance, balling on a budget edition. The E60 M5 as my daily, the Porsche 996 C4S as my weekend car, and the Porsche Cayenne Turbo as my family vehicle. And after doing this, I'm now realizing I only spent 50 grand, and normally I would say I use that 10 grand for maintenance to keep the 3 cars running. However, that isn't an issue with these 3 cars. So maybe instead of the SMG model, I'll opt for a $20,000 6-speed manual version of the E60 M5, and boom, there it is. That's my 3-car garage. Not a bad driveway if you ask me, especially if they're all running properly. So if you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching, and go ahead and comment below what's going to be your ballin' on a budget, no maintenance 3-car garage with a 60 grand budget. I'm interested to see what you guys pick below. And also, don't forget to hit the subscribe to keep up to date with my videos. And until next time, you guys, peace out.